This was originally conceived as kind of a thank you for KDOW listeners. As we're here at the Money Show, we wanted folks to be able to, listeners to come by and be able to kind of meet some of our financial experts, some of the people from Ransom Notes Radio, some of the people from Townhall Finance, because this is the truth. We live in a time where kind of unprecedentedly, you guys have the ability to influence policy here in the United States. Whether you're a liberal Democrat or conservative Republican, it really doesn't matter to me. You have the ability to reach out and influence what our politicians and what our public policy makers are doing at both the state and federal level. And to the extent that there's a certain amount of turmoil in the country, I think part of what's going on right now is politicians are having a tough time adjusting to that new reality. And it's very, very important to us, I think, as a country, that you continue to do the things that you're doing. Whether you agree with me, you listen to me on the radio and you agree with me, or you think I'm a jerk, which is more likely probably. The important thing is that you continue to apply pressure to politicians in Washington, D.C., because I got to tell you, as somebody who knows some of these people fairly well, they don't always have your best interest in heart, believe it or not. They are working for a completely different agenda as politicians. There's something inside of them that's a little bit different. And, kind of the rule of thumb when I was a consultant was that a third of them we would get elected and they would disappoint us. A third would do exactly what they said they would do, and a third of them would surprise us with really good things. But that still leaves not really, really great odds for we the people. But almost uniquely in our history today, we have the ability to influence policymakers in a way that we didn't, say, 20, 30 years ago. And so the focus properly belongs on you folks. I hear from a lot of people, like, when are we going to get, and certainly from, I'm a conservative, so I hear from a lot of conservative folks, they say, well, where are we going to get our next Ronald Reagan? Who's going to save us? And you know what? The answer to the question is you're not. You're not going to get that, so forget that. Okay? The foundation of this country and the saving of this country is going to happen right here in this room with people just like you. And that's really what's going to happen. And you know what the great thing about it is that's the most sustainable thing that we could possibly imagine. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be fun. There's going to be an awful lot of consternation along the way. But it's going to be lasting and it's going to be real, because what has happened is the internet has democratized everything. It has democratized our ability to go out and get information. It has democratized our ability to go out and get education. I can get the very source documents today about global warming, or about a biotech company, or about some bill that's going through Congress that the experts can get, and I can read it and understand it just like they can, and I can say, you know what? The math is wrong here. What you're saying right here in Section 2, Paragraph 3, I know about that, and that's wrong. And that's unlike any time that we've ever lived in history. When we were all growing up, in every city there were probably a couple of newspapers, a couple of radio stations, a couple of TV stations, so maybe 30, 40 people decided every single day what the news was. They decided what you were going to hear about the truth that was going on in this country. That's not true anymore. Today there's a battle, okay, between what it is that we hear and what it is that we receive, and we don't have 20 or 30 people deciding in every city what the truth is. You can decide for yourself, and you can act for yourself. And the real thing that's going on, regardless of party, is politicians are having a problem adjusting to that new reality. They're doing the same things they have always done, okay, which is pandering. Right or left, it doesn't matter, which is pandering, which is pretending to come up with solutions. When you look at the legislation we passed, for example, the legislation on Obamacare, whether you like it or not, the fact of the matter is it's not a deficit fighter. It's not bringing down healthcare costs. It's not doing the very things that it was premised. Same thing with Dodd-Frank. We passed Dodd-Frank to solve too big to fail. We have fewer banks, more concentrated asset, and now instead of a moral guarantee to bail out the banking system, we have a legal guarantee by the federal government to bail out the banking system. How do we do that? How do we live in a country today where the Federal Reserve Bank can go out into the open market and buy $6 trillion worth of mortgage-backed securities and other federal government securities, yet when we needed the money in order to combat the liquidity crisis in 2008, the Federal Reserve Bank, the Reserve Bank of the United States of America, did not have the money to bail out the banks. We asked the federal government to do it. And then we turned around and we asked the Reserve Bank of the United States of America to do monetary policy things in order to help create jobs, because the federal government was doing things to stop job creation. And you have to ask yourself, whether you're on the right or the left, you have to ask yourself, when they are gaming the system like that over and over and over again, whether it's the right or the left, whether it's we're going to go into Iraq and it's going to be a cakewalk, or whether it's this bailout will never happen again because we're going to pass Dodd-Frank and take care of it. When they're gaming the system and they're not even pretending to solve the problems that they tell you that they're going to solve, you got to ask yourself a question: why? And part of it just has to do with the fact that we're aware now. We have the ability to communicate amongst ourselves above the media. We have the ability to decide for ourselves just the same way experts can. And politicians are just having a very, very tough time figuring that out. They're doing the same things that they were taught to do in Politics 101, but they're not getting the same result. And one of the things about the United States of America it's comforting in a way, it's frustrating in a way, and it makes us look messier than we really are, is that it takes a great deal of time to turn this ship around. It's not one election cycle, it's not two election cycles, and the truth of the matter is today we have the government that we deserve. Whether you're on the right or the left, we have the government that we deserve because we voted them in. We did. And if we don't have change that's happening the way we want, it's our fault, because that's the way elections work. Over a long period of time, though, and I always tell candidates this, and they don't want to listen, and I tell activists this too, politics comes down to one simple word: truth. Short-term, no. Long-term, yes. Politics comes down to a simple thing: truth. If you are on the side of truth and justice, okay, and this is especially true when it comes to economics, because what is more fair than economics? It wasn't the United States that took down the Soviet Union, it was economics that took down the Soviet Union. They had a system that would not work, that relied upon compulsion, that relied upon people pasting different versions of history into an encyclopedia in order to make it work. And that's not a system that's built to last, and it's not going to last over a period of time. Yes, it may have taken 70 years to collapse eventually. But the same is true here in the United States of America. We may have a fractional reserve banking system that's off the gold standard that survived for the last 40 years, but that doesn't mean that it's always going to be that way. Eventually, economics will catch up with it. Eventually, those consequences that we've been putting off for so long will overtake us. That's just the inevitable law of economics. That's the way it is. And the bottom line is that if we don't have a government that's intent upon compelling us to accept what we can accept, then eventually the economic consequences will travel along with us. So, all of that to say this. We put together this reception not to talk about ourselves, but to put the focus back on you where it properly belongs. Because the truth of the matter is if there's going to be a change in this country, if there's going to be a savior in this country, it's not going to come from Ronald Reagan. I wish that it would. I truly do wish that it would. But I know something that maybe other people don't know. And that's, we live in a time, and we're very fortunate to live in this time, where you, and you have an outsized influence on what politicians do and what our policies are. And all you really have to do is make your voice heard. It's not fun. It's not pretty. It's tiring. It's frustrating. I'm frustrated too. I think most people on the right or left, and that's the great secret about American politics, is that most people on the right and the left are upset, and they're upset about the same things. And they use the ideology just to keep us apart, but they're upset about the same things. And what they're upset about is that we've been sold a bill of goods that says we're going to solve too big to fail. Yet here's legislation that does the exact opposite of what it is they said they were going to do. And you don't have to be a Republican or a Democrat. Sarbanes-Oxley is the same thing. Now, here was a body of legislation that was meant to stop fraud in accounting with publicly traded companies. Well, it didn't do that. There were adequate remedies. There are people in jail. People spend their whole lives in jail because of things that happen with WorldCom and Enron. What it did do, though, is it prevented a whole host of companies over the last 15 years from going public. It denied them access to capital markets at a time when more countries are embracing capitalism, more people are moving out of poverty into the middle class than any time in world history. The United States has been left behind. The United States is no longer that capital market powerhouse that we used to be. We've gone from about 600 IPOs a year back in the early 90s, and those were not the go-go 90s, by the way, to maybe 150 IPOs. At a time when capitalism is marching triumphantly through the world, when our system of economics and our system of government has proved better than the communist system, the foe that we fought for so long, we've been left behind in that. And primarily it's because of things like Sarbanes-Oxley. And you cannot tell me that the politicians passed Sarbanes-Oxley because they were really worried about accounting issues. It was a power grab, just like Dodd-Frank is a power grab, just like everything else. Why is every piece of legislation that comes through Washington, D.C., why does it all contain a data gathering component? You have to ask yourself that. Dodd-Frank, data gathering. Common Core, data gathering. Anything that has to do with housing, data gathering. They want personally identifiable information of all of us. So, pleased to have you guys here. Remember that if you take anything else away from it, it's that really the focus is not on us. It's not on the people who have the voices that go out there. The focus properly belongs to you guys. And I am often humbled because I have the ability to say the things that my listeners and my readers don't always have the ability to say. And so keep listening, write to us, let us know what you think. Read our stuff and talk back to us, because I'm one of the few columnists who, in this internet age, actually answers his mail. But I think that's what the medium is for. It's for the dialogue back and forth. I think it's a great part of what makes America great. And just remember that the solutions ultimately to the problems in this country, yeah, we can talk about policy things, we can talk about going back to the gold standard, we can talk about, well, we should be doing this thing. But ultimately what it really comes down to is you guys staying involved and doing the things that are allowed under this Republican system of government. And when I say Republican, I'm talking about small R, not big R. And if you do that, things will be fine. It's going to be messy. It's not going to be fun. But things will be fine, because that's the nature of our history. That's the nature of the United States of America. So very pleased to welcome our honored and distinguished guest, Steve Forbes. You might know him as one of the most successful financial publishers ever. You might know him as a former presidential candidate. You might know him as a guy who has warned for decades about this muddle that we're in currently economically. One of the things that you may not know about him is that when they coined the word gentleman, that guy was in that dictionary. I mean, he is just a supremely decent guy. And I wish we had more like him. I wish we could nominate him right now for President of the United States, because I certainly would be the first to vote for him. Please welcome Steve Forbes.